Welcome to the 10th edition of our Maria Weber Conference on China, promoted by ISPI in cooperation with Fondazione Italia Cina. And it is a great pleasure for me to open it up with Susan Shrink, Professor Susan Shrink, one of the most prominent experts on US-China relations in the world. Professor Shrink currently is research professor and chair at the 21st Century China Center of the University of California, San Diego. She served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State during the second Clinton administration in charge of devising US policy for East Asia. Her 2007 book on China Global Rise continues to shape public debates in the USA and around the world. Welcome, Professor Shrink. You might say that when it comes to China-US relation, you have seen it all. You even bet Nixon to visiting communist China in the early 70s. And in the past 4 years, several international observers declared that bilateral relations are now at their lowest since ping-pong diplomacy. You were there. You witnessed the first distinction between China and US firsthand. Would you agree to this sentence and compare to how things were back then? Where do we stand today? Please.
Thank you so much, and thanks for inviting me to join you this morning. It's a great honor, and I'm very pleased to be here. Wow, you start off by asking me the question that gets me the most emotional, really. Because you're right, I'm an old China hand. I've actually been studying China since the 1960s, and I first visited in 1971 before Richard Nixon with a group of other students. And really my whole career has been wrapped up with the progress that China has made. So it has been a very gratifying time to see that the Chinese people's lives have really improved, of course, economically, and also in terms of greater individual choice about where they live, their jobs, their marriages, everything really. The reforms, especially the political reforms, never went as fast or as far as many Chinese people had hoped. But there was tremendous progress. And of course, US-China relations was part of that. The achievements were those of the Chinese people themselves, but the United States actually facilitated it by having a pretty constructive relationship and trying to negotiate the issues where we disagreed. But in the last decade, really, and this starts before Xi Jinping, Chinese policies have changed, foreign policies and domestic policies, and the United States and the rest of the world has reacted negatively to these changes. And so relations are, I would agree, the worst that they have been, certainly since the days right after the Tiananmen crisis in 1989. So for me, personally, it's very disheartening, but I'm a person who actually hasn't yet lost hope in the possibilities for China trying to get back to political reform in the future.
Thank you, Professor. I think several times you have been interviewed on the issue I'm raising right now. Which legacy will the 4 years of Donald Trump leave to Joe Biden with regards to China?
Well, I'd say there are two legacies that are related to public opinion in the United States and public opinion in China. in both countries, views of one another have become much more negative. And of course, in the United States and in China, those views do have an influence on the policy of the public officials. However, so how did that happen? In the United States, this backlash against the changes in Chinese behavior that I just mentioned that started, I'd say, in between the first and second terms of Hu Jintao around the mid-2000s, actually before the global financial crisis, around the time of the Olympics, and then aggravated by the global financial crisis. And then when Xi Jinping came in, this more aggressive behavior, particularly in the South China Sea, which changed the narrative about was China a responsible rising power or a destabilizing, aggressive rising power? These things just continue to get worse. And then the backlash, the international backlash, also grew. And then Donald Trump, his administration took a much more confrontational and more ideological approach to China, which left, first of all, didn't accomplish anything. I see no way in which the Trump administration has actually achieved any positive changes in China's own policies or behavior. But secondly, definitely left a strong impact on public opinion. And because the Trump administration policy was so hostile, it also left a very negative impact on Chinese public opinion, that especially after COVID, when Beijing did such an effective job of controlling the spread of COVID, people are in China really resent the criticism from the United States and from other countries, and have become much more negative about the United States. Now, US public opinion, I do expect that if the two governments manage to show that they can cooperate on some important issues like the pandemic, like climate change, nuclear nonproliferation, and if the overall approach of the Biden administration is more practical, less ideological, I do think that US public opinion will once again become somewhat more balanced. But, and in China, hopefully that will happen too, if Xi Jinping's government takes advantage of this opening to stabilize relations with the United States. And if public opinion moderates in the two countries, that will be very significant. But I don't think anyone should expect a return to the golden age of engagement between the United States and China, and relations will continue to be more competitive.
Thank you, Professor. Not back to the golden age, but less ideological and less confrontational. But what would you expect the new Biden administration to do with China on two specific dossiers, trade and the technological race?
Well, on trade, of course, the important question is what happens to the tariffs? And even though there's a consensus among economists that the objective of the tariffs, namely to narrow the bilateral trade deficit, was the wrong goal, and of course has not been achieved, and that the tariffs are in fact costly to American economy and American consumers as well as producers. Nonetheless, I think it may be difficult for the Biden folks to come in and simply get rid of the tariffs without some action on China's side. And so this is really the moment of decision for Xi Jinping. And I hope that he will help make it more politically feasible for the Biden administration to simply abolish the tariffs by taking some actions related to market reforms, opening up more sectors to foreign investment, and some of the structural changes that China committed to back in 2013 in the third plenum document, which still have not been acted upon in China. So it really, the ball is in Xi Jinping's court, and it really will depend on his decisions whether or not the Biden team will be able to completely abolish the tariffs. It will probably take some negotiations. It will not be done immediately or unilaterally, I don't believe. I think that would be too politically difficult. On technology, I think you will continue to see competition, but you'll see on the US side, rather than emphasizing barriers and forms of decoupling, I think you will see a greater emphasis on America strengthening itself, to invest more federal funds on R&D, to invest in education, to basically run faster so that we maintain our competitiveness. And so if people are interested in this question, please tune in today. Go to the 21st Century China Center UC San Diego website, register for an event we're having where we will roll out a report on the science and technology contest between the US and China, in which we offer our recommendations to the Biden administration, which I think they will be receptive to, which will be to self-strengthen, to introduce risk management mechanism tailored to each economy, and to maintain openness, because openness is really America's greatest advantage. Thank you.
Thank you. So as you said, America first will probably be less on the agenda, but keep China second will stay and remain high in the agenda. Do you believe that in this effort, Biden will manage in avoiding America to be alone, which is to say, will he be able to establish a coalition of states, as he repeatedly claimed during the presidential campaign?
Yes, so I'm glad you asked that, because I should have highlighted a very important difference in the Biden approach, which is to work collectively with our allies and friends and like-minded countries in trying to coordinate our approaches to China. And of course, first to mend fences, because we have, under the Trump administration, America has really disregarded the interests of our allies, and we have a lot of feelings that we have to mend, and we need to revive our alliances. That's a very important objective of the Biden administration. Now, whether or not we'll be able to coordinate our approaches to China, I don't think our expectations should be too high, but in the technology area, one thing that our group has proposed is to try to build a kind of consortium, maybe starting with small groups of countries, like-minded countries, to try to coordinate our approaches to Chinese technology, to try to reinforce the norms of research integrity, and make sure that intellectual property theft is something that is reduced, and to try to harmonize our approaches to telecommunications, to artificial intelligence, to biotech, and a whole range of other specific technologies. But to do that, the United States and Europe, for one thing, will have to come closer than they are right now on our regulations on privacy and security related to the internet. And that will be very challenging as well. But it's something that we think we should aim toward.
Can I ask you a brief comment on trade agreements? Because yesterday, a Pacific trade agreement was signed, all but United States, which is in a sense the opposite of the one Obama had proposed, all but China. How would you comment? Is that the result of 4 years of confrontation or a lost opportunity for the United States?
Well, I do think it's a lost opportunity for the United States, but RCEP, this 15-country trade agreement, was always moving forward on a parallel track with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which has a new name that I can never remember, adding on a couple of letters, MMTPP or something like that. The Japanese government, Prime Minister Abe, did, I think, a very impressive job of sustaining momentum on TPP. And of course, the United States has, under Trump, pulled out of all these things. But I will have to wait and see what happens to TPP. I would not view RCEP as simply purely a Chinese accomplishment. But it does, and of course, it's a shallower trade agreement, less ambitious than TPP. But it still is impressive and will improve trade and economic growth in the countries participating. I think the United States should join RCEP. There's absolutely no reason not to, in my view. It'll make India, of course, is the other large country that's outside. And then TPP, I've been struck by the fact that some influential economic and political officials in China and retired officials have recently said once again that they think it would be a good thing for China to have a roadmap and gradually join TPP. Now, whether or not the Biden administration is going to be willing to spend the political capital to get the Democratic Party and American public behind TPP, trade agreements are always very difficult for us. I'm not sure, but I think it would be highly desirable for us to go back to TPP and to work together with China on this roadmap to have it eventually join. And of course, these reform-minded people in China are hoping that if China commits to join the TPP, it will put pressure on the domestic market reforms in a positive way, just the way their entry to the World Trade Organization did.
My last question, Professor, on the pandemic. Very often we refer to the pandemic as an accelerator of our transformation into a digital world, acceleration of other trends which have been present for long. And on China, it has been often mentioned as an accelerator of China rise. Would you agree? And if you agree that China came out of this challenge successfully, what is the challenge ahead for China rise in the next 2 decades?
Well, I think it's right now, if you took a snapshot of the world, certainly China appears to be the most successful country at managing the spread of COVID, but and in sustaining some economic growth. And in fact, everyone throughout the world should be very grateful that China is still growing, because it's a it's a very positive thing for sustaining global growth. But I think it's a little too early to declare that China is somehow the winner in a contest here. For one thing, people are still not traveling internationally. We're still in the middle of the global pandemic. And the countries that have been the most strict at controlling the movements of people are the ones that have been the most successful. So China looks very successful because it's able to control those movements better than those of us in democratic countries right now. So, the discouraging thing, however, was that at this moment, Chinese foreign policy, which could have been very gracious and benevolent and helpful to countries throughout the world, they lost their restraint again and made what I think are major diplomatic mistakes with this wolf warrior diplomacy, wanting every country around the world to recognize Xi Jinping's leadership and the Chinese Communist Party for what a great job they did, and become cheerleaders for the Beijing political line. And we still see, and they picked fights with India, continue to see clashes in the South China Sea, the East China Sea. So the challenge to China is, and to the Xi Jinping leadership is, can it exercise restraint so that it really does enhance its international reputation as a result of the very effective way they controlled COVID. Certainly it's true that the United States has lost a lot of international respect for our own mishandling of the epidemic. But one thing you got to say, at least in the United States, we still have the peaceful turnover of power. We had an election. It's not the most impressive election, because we still have a president who is a sore loser. But you will see the peaceful turnover of power, and you'll see President Biden in the White House. Whereas in China, they abandoned this practice, and we may have Xi Jinping in power for much longer. So I say the challenge to China is to try to exercise greater restraint and to restore its reputation as a responsible power.
Professor Shirk, it was extremely nice and enlightening listening to you. Thank you very much indeed. I have the pleasure now to turn to Professor Alex Berkowski, who will moderate session 1 of this conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you. Great questions, by the way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, hello. Hi, Paolo Magri. Thank you very much for introducing me, and of course, so we started off very well. Thank you to both Paolo Magri and Professor Shirk. Professor Shirk, when you said you're an old China hand and you have been to China many times, and the first time in 1971, it's a bit of an understatement, I'd say. You know, when I look into your book on page 15, you haven't only been to China, but you've also met Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai, among other people. So, you know, you really have been on the forefront of U.S.-China relations from the very beginning, and you've observed and analyzed China ever since. We're very grateful for this. And I'm actually using your book for my Chinese history course in Pavia. All right, so we move on to the first proper session of this conference, reframing Western relations with China. We have 3 speakers. We have Lucrezia Poggetti, analyst on EU-China relations from the Mercator Institute for China Studies in Berlin, Germany. We have John Seaman, research fellow at the Center for Asian Studies at the French Institute of International Relations in ISPI in Paris. Welcome to you as well. And we have our colleague with an impossible second name, but I will do my very best. We have George N. Polosos, sorry, George, the director of the EU-China program at the Centre International de Formation Européenne in Brussels. All of you very warm welcome on behalf of Paolo Magri, ISPI, and myself, and we're looking forward to listening to your, I'd say, 10-minute presentations. We start off with Lucrezia from the Mercator Institute for China Studies, and Lucrezia will be talking about what she knows best. She's arguably one of Europe's top EU-China relations analysts, and we're looking forward to listening to you, Lucrezia, on your assessment on the current state and prospects of EU-China relations. Over to you, Lucrezia.
Thank you so much, Axel, and thank you for the really kind introduction. I'm very happy to be here. It's a real pleasure. What I would like to do in the next 10 minutes or so is to talk about the evolution of European policy on China. And in particular, I'll be looking back a little bit to look briefly into a phase of extended wishful thinking on the side of Europeans and Western liberal democracies more broadly in our dealings with China. And then mention a couple of moments that served as watershed to trigger a rethinking on the side of European policymakers. And I will conclude with a couple of thoughts on the state of affairs and where we currently stand in terms of concrete policy proposals for European China policy. So today's event is framed around the COVID-19 pandemic, and in particular, the COVID-19 pandemic forcing the entire world to adjust to a new China. So I thought I would start from here to say that while there is no doubt that the pandemic has made Europeans more aware, for example, of our dependency on China for critical supplies, and also of the challenges of relying on an authoritarian state for those supplies, but also for information about COVID-19. Europe's rethinking on China goes back a few years. And to my mind, there are 2 main changes that have created this rethinking. We have started to take Xi Jinping by his words. And secondly, we have started to consider the geopolitical and the security implications of relations with China into our assessments and subsequent policies. Now, starting from us starting to take Xi Jinping at face value, there's always a bit of a discrepancy between what the Chinese party state says and does internally and what it tells foreign audiences. A recent example of this, as we discuss an investment agreement between the EU and China, is China promising to make concessions to move things forward by the end of 2020, while at the same time internally Xi Jinping giving more power to state-owned enterprises. This dynamic has extended quite broadly to other aspects of the relationship. And in general, I call this a phase of wishful thinking, because Western liberal democracy selectively picked those narratives that adjusted to our expectations. And obviously there are a few moments in history that have reinforced this perception that China was indeed on a path of convergence with liberal democracies. First of all, obviously, China's accession to the WTO, but also China's promises for opening politically and economically ahead of the 2008 Olympic Games. And then again, the third plenum in 2013, when Xi Jinping promised that market forces would play a bigger role into China's economy. Interestingly, 2013 is also the same year when document number 9 was leaked, and everyone here is very familiar with this document on the state of the ideological sphere in China, which described in rather antagonistic terms Western values and system as a threat to one-party rule in China. But Europeans, as much as other advanced economies, Western liberal democracies, have very much kept focusing on their own hopes that China would eventually open up, as they were expecting it to. Then a few moments, as I said earlier, served as watershed in making Europeans realize the need to adjust their policies to China. Obviously, internally in China, the 19th Party Congress and then the abolition of presidential term limits made many realize that the Chinese Communist Party was in fact trying to create greater control over politics, society, and the economy. And it was also confident about its own system as a suitable alternative to liberal democracy by offering Chinese solutions to the outside world as a way of creating growth without liberalizing politically. In Europe, we've had our own watershed moments, and everyone here is very familiar with the examples. The surge of Chinese state-led investment in 2016. Here in Germany, the acquisition of KUKA. The Chinese state being involved in mergers and acquisition, in investment here in Europe, in particular in strategic industries, leading to the whole debate about investment screening. And another point that made realize the implications of close relations with China was when European member states blocked statements and action on human rights violations in China and on China's illegal behavior in the South China Sea. So that's sort of where we found ourselves between 2016 and 2018, with these events leading to a rethinking that culminated in the publication in March 2019 of a strategic outlook by the European Commission. Everyone knows the strategic outlook very well, for calling China a partner, a competitor, and importantly, a systemic rival. At the same time, the strategic outlook does a good job at focusing, yes, on the need to rebalance economic relations, while at the same time mentioning also those security challenges posed by a rising China. China's growing military capabilities, exercises close to the EU, technological ambitions, and so on and so forth. Meanwhile, those European countries like Italy, but also the members of the 17+1 framework for cooperation with China, who had banked on the hope that close political relations, and in particular joining the Belt and Road Initiative through formal endorsement, would lead to special economic treatment, they have grown rather disappointed. So that was then, as Professor Magri already said in his introduction, already also then accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic and the perception that China made some missteps in the beginning of the epidemic in Wuhan. Its communication was not transparent enough, followed by rather aggressive mass diplomacy, which was effectively an external propaganda campaign here in Europe, and obviously the imposition of a national security law in Hong Kong. All these events have led to very negative views about China in Europe and elsewhere growing. And indeed, there seems to be a growing consensus now across Europe about the challenges posed by China. And in that sense, it is quite remarkable that for the first time ever, at the Special European Council Summit at the beginning of October, all the EU member states finally endorsed the language and the approach set out in the strategic outlook. And now we are in a phase where we see European China policy in the process of becoming truly realistic and multifaceted, as it is explained in the strategic outlook. And I won't have time now to deal with all the specific policy proposals in the pipeline, but just to mention a few initiatives to show really the scope of European China policy at the moment. There are initiatives to increase resilience, obviously in the 5G realm, with the EU leading the work that led to the publication of a cybersecurity toolbox, risk mitigation, but also initiatives to address, for example, China's disinformation activities and increase our democratic resilience. The intention to diversify our ties in the Indo-Pacific, with Germany following France in publishing its own policy guidelines, which is something that the EU as a whole now seems intent on picking up as an effort. On the liberal values agenda, the EU is in the process of finalizing it has proposed a Magnitsky Act, its own Magnitsky Act, and it's finalizing export controls that should lead to better due diligence for companies that export surveillance technology. So this is just to mention a few initiatives. And we could talk more and more also about, again, the potential now for transatlantic coordination under a Biden administration that will hopefully re-engage European partners. But I will leave it at that, and I'm happy to come back to any questions in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lucrezia. I finally met somebody who's more critical on China than myself. I'm very happy about this. Seriously, thank you very much, Lucrezia, for this very, very sharp analysis of where we stand in terms of EU-China relations. And of course, very briefly before I hand over to John, of course, the narrative, things have changed quite fundamentally, and I think, and I'm sure we can talk about this later with Lucrezia and John and George. The reception the Chinese foreign minister got in Europe when he toured Europe a couple of months ago was a very cold reception, I'd say. I think he didn't expect that, and all these efforts by China to change the narrative that China is the savior of Europe through providing European countries with medical supplies and doing all in its might, forgetting about the fact that the virus originated in Wuhan, and that the Chinese government was hiding this fairly unsuccessfully for a couple of months, and the pandemic certainly could have taken a very, very different development if China had reported on the outbreak of the virus very much earlier. And of course, China was thinking that it could change the narrative and point the narrative into a direction favorable for China. But I think things have changed, and I think the way things have changed in Europe, the perception, the criticism, the national security law, European countries now jointly criticizing China for disinformation campaigns. I think it's something that China, Beijing, and the political leaders in Beijing did not necessarily expect from Europe, whom they always, considered to be, a group of ununified pushovers that would, cave into Chinese pressure as soon as China would threaten to limit investments in the respective countries. But I think there's a fresh wind. Whether it's good, whether it's constructive, remains yet to be seen. But things have changed, and I'm sure we can talk about this later. Again, Lucrezia, thank you very much for this. Very, very sharp, very good, and there's a lot to talk about later. John, we're moving back to the US, following up on what Professor Shirk said. So good luck with this. You have to, a very strong, very difficult job, very good task, to follow after Professor Shirk. I've looked at the outline you sent to us, and I found it very interesting. You said that of course, and we all know this, U.S. policies towards China have been changing, even before Trump, the attitude in Washington has been different, and of course, Trump, of course, accelerated all of this, and the tone became sharper, harsher, and all the chaos that Trump created. But as you say, as you write in the outline, there has been already a general tendency among U.S. policymakers, among the government, among the administration, among the Congress, to become much more critical about China. And we're very much looking forward to hearing your analysis on the current state of U.S.-China relations, and maybe the ones or the relationship or the approach of Washington's approach towards China under under Joe Biden. Over to you, John. 10 minutes. I've got a problem with names today. 10 minutes to you also.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to hearing from you, John. Over to you.
Thank you, Axel. This is, of course, a very difficult job for me. You're not the only one with Susan Shirk's book. She inspired a whole generation of China watchers, and so it's definitely a very tough act to follow. I'll do my best, and of course it's great to come after Lucrezia, who did a great job of introducing a lot of these themes that perhaps I'll touch on. So again, I think what we're looking at here in the conversation with Professor Shirk was interesting about this point that came up about the U.S.-China relationship being at its lowest point, as she said, at least since the Tiananmen Square events in 1989, if not since ping pong diplomacy. And it really raises a question of whether or not this has something to do with Donald Trump, whether or not this is a Trump-specific phenomenon, or if this is something that is more structural. I would definitely argue that we're looking at it. We've seen a structural shift, and I think both of you, Axel and Lucrezia, have touched on that and many of the reasons for that. But some have asked the question of whether or not we're looking at a reset of relations between the U.S. and China. I would say I would be very hesitant to go that far. And I would say first, it's due to a structural shift, as many of you have talked about. I'll touch on that a little bit. But I would like to get into perhaps some of the more specifics about what we could see from a Biden administration and how that would be different from Trump's approach. But then I'll finish up on many of the constraints that the Biden administration will have, due notably to U.S. domestic politics and the difficulties I think the Biden administration will have in dealing with Congress, and the freedom that will give him on his foreign policy. So again, I think that the Trump administration, we'd like to think it's some sort of anomaly. And now we can go back to something else that we knew before, but as you had mentioned, as Susan had mentioned before, really there are structural shifts in the relationship that predate Trump, that were really there at least from the end of the Obama administration. But I think a lot of these shifts are due to changes in China, changes in China's approach in their policy. Susan had mentioned those go all the way back to the middle of the Hu Jintao era. And I think really the awakening in the United States was due to the misperceptions of Xi Jinping and what American policymakers maybe thought Xi Jinping would be in terms of offering reform. Many of those reforms that never came about. We've gone backwards on human rights. Economic reforms have not been what was expected. Reforms on the political side, governance reforms, these sorts of things have not been what we expected, and a much more assertive, self-confident China on the international scene, starting with the South China Sea, but being much broader than that. So there's definitely a sort of a bipartisan, I wouldn't say consensus, there's definitely dissenting views, but there is some sort of new consensus in Washington. And a lot of that was expressed in an article, in a February 2018 article in Foreign Affairs by Eli Ratner and Kurt Campbell, which they called the China Reckoning, which kind of came back on this some of the pillars of the engagement policy with China. And I think it's important to note that Eli Ratner, one of the co-authors, is part of the Biden transition team. And so this idea that we need a new approach to China that is different from what we knew for 30 or 40 years before is not something that is specific to Donald Trump. So the terms of the debate have changed in the United States, and it's unlikely that Joe Biden or Biden administration will offer something that is that is fundamentally different in terms of the way that China is seen. But it will offer something quite substantially different in terms of style. And Susan had touched on some of these things. Perhaps I'll try to go a bit more into detail. Consultation with allies, of course, is something that Biden before the election has put out there as a key pillar. U.S. re-engagement and multilateralism. We've seen China advance significantly within multilateral institutions, so we can probably see the U.S. reinvesting in a lot of these multilateral institutions through the UN and whatnot. So there will be some frictions with China there. And also, I mean, the Trump administration, more ideological, yes and no. I would say that in many ways, the Biden administration seems to be, or at least Biden himself seems to be more driven by values-based foreign policy. I think it's instructive to note that in John Bolton's memoirs, he talked about how Donald Trump applauded Beijing's policy in Xinjiang. And to me, that's, I mean, certainly there were ideological components to this sort of strategic competition with China, but on issues such as human rights or democracy promotion, at least Donald Trump himself was not an advocate for these sorts of issues. But it seems that Donald Trump will, I mean, excuse me, but my own lapses, Joe Biden would be a much more vocal proponent of these sort of things for human rights, democracy promotion. He's promoted what he calls a global summit for democracy soon after his taking of office. And none of these are likely to make relations with Beijing any easier, but none of them will be easy for the U.S. to achieve either. Looking at consultation with allies, for instance, the U.S. has a lot of work to do in rebuilding the trust that has been lost over the last 4 years. I think it will be very difficult for the Biden administration to regain that, seeing the rather narrow victory. If you look at the total number of votes, sure, he won by landslide, but there was not the blue wave that many had expected. And Trump did succeed in getting a lot of voters out in his favor. That says something about the stability of U.S. politics and what allies can expect 2 years down the road when we have new congressional elections, and 4 years down the road when there's a new presidential election. So the U.S. has a lot of work to do in regaining the trust of its allies. And already just in terms of dealing with conflicts between allies themselves, if we look at Asia, the Trump administration really didn't care much about dealing with conflicts between allies. And we've seen Japan-Korea relations take a considerable hit, downgraded considerably, whereas in the past, the U.S. would have traditionally stepped in to sort of mitigate the differences between allies. In Europe, it's been perhaps a bit different. The Trump has sort of galvanized a certain level of European unity, and I think it will be difficult to refine that perhaps in a Biden administration. So Europe is looking at perhaps a more difficult time in finding consensus in dealing with Washington. I would say at a time when I think we really need to be looking at its strategic autonomy and building these sorts of concepts, which are not likely to be easy concepts to deal with when talking with the United States. So how much leeway is the U.S. willing to give to Europe, this sort of thing? So on some of these issues, of course, human rights is never been an area in which in relations with Beijing where Washington's policies have had much effect. So these sort of new ideas that Biden, or this change in a Biden administration, is not necessarily going to be necessarily very easy to navigate. Again, what Susan said, something else that we will see from a Biden administration, a much more pragmatic approach. And I think in that, perhaps the Biden administration has something to take from Europe in terms of just how the U.S. is going to frame its relationship with Beijing. And I think that there's perhaps something to take from the strategic outlook that Lucrezia has talked about, in terms of promoting a more complex view of relations with Beijing, in terms of talking about China as a partner on climate, on dealing with a pandemic, on non-proliferation, but also as a competitor and eventually a rival. So perhaps we'll see a bit more of a sophisticated language coming from Washington. But at the last point, and I'll finish on this, and I'll try to be brief so we can get to the discussion. Is just about the constraints that Joe Biden will have coming in. I mean, like I said, we didn't see this blue wave. He's very likely to be confronted with a Republican Senate. That will make things very difficult for him. He'll have to make a lot of compromises that he may have not otherwise wanted to make. There is a fair amount of consensus within Congress on a tougher policy towards China. The Republicans have been pushing that forward, of course, and the last thing that they're going to want to see is a turnover of a lot of the policies that Trump put into place. The Republicans will want to see a validation, rather, of a lot of those policies. So you're likely to see a lot of pushback from Congress, and of course, the Senate is very important in terms of appointments to key posts in government, this sort of thing. But on a number of key policy issues, on trade policy, so we talk about whether or not the U.S. is going to come back into CPTPP. Trump, that was the first thing that he said he's not going to do, as he threw that out the window. So I think that would be a very tough battle for Biden with Congress. The Iran nuclear deal, of course, is sort of there is a China dimension on that. Sanctions policy, Congress has been very proactive on sanctions. Maybe we could see something on Huawei and semiconductors, but perhaps the most problematic issue in U.S.-China relations, which is Taiwan. Congress, of course, is very influential on designing U.S. And pushing forward U.S. cooperation with Taiwan. So I think those domestic political constraints on the Biden administration will have an effect on U.S.-China policy moving forward. And so I'll leave it there, and we can go into this perhaps further if you like. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, John. And just very briefly, as you say, sure, it's not going to be America first, and it's probably going to be allies first. And then, of course, the good news is, of course, there are lots of issues, and the Congress and the resistance from the Republicans. The Senate is going to be, dominated by the Republicans, and there's Taiwan, of course, also an issue. But the good news is probably, before we hand over to George, is that relationship or the cooperation, with China, towards, in terms of policies towards China with the allies, could not have been any worse. So it can only get better. And the level is very, very low. And when you have followed, and we have all followed the kind of exchanges between Trump and its former European allies, I think it would be very difficult for Joe Biden. Why do I call him George? It's Joe Biden. For him not to be able to improve relationship and cooperation very, very quickly. And sure, Taiwan is always an issue, but it always has been an issue. And of course, the U.S. Congress, of course, is very interested in keeping relationship with Taiwan stable, because there's a lot of money involved. There's of course a huge interest in the U.S. Congress to make sure that the U.S. will continue to export weapons to Taiwan on a large scale, and that was always the case. And of course, there the Democrats and the Republicans certainly I would assume, and we can talk about this later, would also agree. So the menu is very, very big, and Trump has done a lot of damage to all of this over the last 4 years. But again, the good news is that it can only get better, and we are starting from a very low level, I would argue. But we'll come back to this later on, maybe if we have time, and if I stop talking now. George, over to you. We move back to Europe. More precisely, Southern Europe. Chinese investments in Southern Europe, Greece in particular. A lot of talk about from the critics, including myself and Lucrezia, of course, also about the danger of Chinese state-owned enterprises taking over too much of Greece's economy, doing too many investments in Greece for Greece to continue to be fully independent. China increasing its political influence in Greece, in Italy, and other southern European countries. So I think it's time, if you want, to separate myth from reality and set the record straight as far as Chinese investments in Southern Europe in general and in Greece in particular are concerned. George, over to you. And again, thank you for accepting our invitation, and nice to see you again. Over to you.
Thank you, Axel. I want to thank the Istituto per gli Studi di Politica Internazionale and Fondazione Italiazzina for today's invitation. Unfortunately, I cannot visit beautiful Italia today, but I hope the disaster will be over soon and we'll be able to be engaged in that kind of very interesting discussions face-to-face in the spring of 2021. I was asked to talk about Chinese investments in Greece in the next minutes. This is what I will do very briefly in order to have the opportunity for a lively discussion afterwards. And then I will share just a couple of remarks on EU-China relations from a different perspective in order possibly to contribute to a lively discussion about their relationship, and of course without repeating the excellent presentations which were heard before by my colleagues. Actually, Axel, you nicely described the situation about Greece in your introduction. What I observe, and that's why I find the case of Greece interesting, which otherwise might not be very interesting for scholars of international relations, is that Greece has embarked on a policy of continuing its economic relations with China, while at the same time it is expanding its defense relationship with the United States and other countries in the region, including Israel. And I personally find this policy mix as very, very successful, and a policy mix which I highly support. I remember Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis, he went to the White House to meet President Trump at the beginning of January 2020 before the COVID disaster. And then he gave a talk in the Atlantic Council, and he was asked about the Chinese investments in Greece. And the answer he gave is that we are managing this with flexibility and dexterity. And I very much like this answer because it reflects the way Greece is approaching the Chinese investments in a period during which the Greek-American defense partnership has reached the best moment of its history. A few days ago, again, Greek Prime Minister Mitsotakis, he participated in a virtual EU-Arab summit, and he said that the Chinese investment in the Piraeus port has been very successful and it is producing win-win results. And he said that just by looking at the numbers. He said that, look, if we go back to 2010 and look at the performance of the Piraeus port, it was almost non-existing. And thanks to the Chinese investment, it became the fastest growing port in the Mediterranean. So Greece, he said, and I agree with him, would have been naive by not benefiting by its geopolitical position in attracting investments, including from China. This is my general remark about Chinese investments in Greece, again, in a period during which Greek-American relationships are growing. And I'm saying this because recently Greece joined the American cause as far as Huawei is concerned, while at the same time it is attempting to attract Chinese investments. So again, this policy mix, which I also find applicable in some other countries of the region, not necessarily EU countries, but obviously countries which are oriented towards the West, like Israel, where I'm also working as a fellow in the Begin Sadat Center. They are managing to keep their political priorities and orientations without necessarily blocking Chinese investments where they consider these investments as in line with their economic recovery or with their economic programs. Another point as far as the Eastern Mediterranean is concerned, which obviously affects Greece, is related to the role of China in the current standoff between Greece, Cyprus, and Turkey. And what I observe is that China is continuing employing its distant approach by all the time mentioning that that kind of issues need to be solved via dialogue under the UN level. So I find this approach very interesting because perhaps someone would have expected from China linking Chinese policies in the Eastern Mediterranean to geopolitical visions and so to play a role in that regard, which from a Greek and also from a Turkish perspective is not happening. By contrast, what I monitor in the previous critical weeks for Greek-Turkish relations and Cypriot-Turkish relations is that China is continuously employing this approach, which is not necessarily related to the situation in the South China Sea. It also has a historic nature, because by looking at the archives and the records of meetings of politicians in the regions from Greece and Turkey with Chinese policymakers, these issues were also discussed in 1974, and the answers that the Chinese government was giving, they were exactly the same with the situation in 2020. It's again very interesting to look at the interest of Chinese companies to expand their investments in countries like Greece beyond the Piraeus port, and with particular emphasis in the sector of energy, where they do participate in several tenders. But what needs to be mentioned in that regard is that recently Chinese companies are forming consortia with Greek or other European companies in order to take part in the implementation of several works. And as far as I know from my own research, the cooperation among different companies, whether it is Greek or German or from other countries with Chinese state-owned enterprises at the practical level, has been very, very harmonious. This is my introduction about Greece, and my remarks about the EU-China relationship, if Axel, you allow me just for two minutes.
Yeah,
and
sure,
again,
we got time.
And again, without repeating the excellent presentations which were heard before, I wrote a paper today in Israel about the transatlantic partnership and how I imagine this transatlantic partnership to evolve after January. And in my opinion, and although I agree with both John and Lucrezia about what they have described before, what I find an urgent priority right now for the European Union and the United States is to agree and to find synergies in order to beat the novel coronavirus. Because the way the Western democracies have responded to the second wave of the pandemic has not been very, very successful. And although we can obviously criticize China for the outbreak of the crisis, which led to the expansion of the crisis in both Europe and the United States, we cannot blame China for the failure of our governments to prevent the second wave of the pandemic. So I strongly believe that both the European Union and the United States need to make the Western governance system more robust in order to provide solution to this problem, which right now the critical problem that China might better use in the future in order to criticize the Western liberal order. And this is not only related to the public health as a top priority, but to the economic recovery. I strongly hope that the New Generation Recovery Fund will contribute to a recovery of the European economy. But if we are looking at the numbers, unemployment and poverty are on the rise, and the Western governments need to provide efficient solutions to the problem itself. And the second point, which I would like to raise, is relevant to the strategic autonomy concept of the European Union, where I would say that in the digital sector, I find it very nicely understandable, but the strategic autonomy concept in a period during which the United States is placing its attention towards Asia will not be successfully implemented without some practical and hard security military commitments. I find it impossible for the European Union to play a more active role in that regard. And that's why I believe that a serious debate needs to start in Europe right now, up to what extent the European Union really wants to be part of a new equilibrium in both the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East by playing our role at the military level, by placing its relationship with Russia within this context, and at the same time by cooperating with the United States. Because it seems to me that it's not very clear right now in Europe up to what extent this strategic autonomy might lead to disagreements with the United States as far as China's role in the world is concerned. This for now, and thank you, Axel, for your patience.
Okay. Thank you very much, George. You're right in time. Thank you very much for this. Only one brief point I have to jump on very, very quickly, and maybe the others going to help me on this later on. I was surprised to hear. Well, I heard about that earlier. That China, of course, as far as European, territorial disputes are concerned, they're very happy to promote, a UN-sponsored solution, and asking everybody to use the United Nations to solve territorial disputes. Whereas, and you alluded to this already, George, whereas in the South China Sea, it is a very different story. In 2016, basically China told the UN to go and screw themselves and not make any proposals as to how to solve the territorial disputes in the South China Sea, thereby dismissing the verdict of the International Court of Arbitration of The Hague as irrelevant. Now, China, maybe you could talk about this briefly later on. Now, China is proposing a very different approach, very far away from home, where direct Chinese or where Chinese territorial dispute, territorial interests are not directly touched. So it's it's the sort of from my view, it's a sort of hypocrisy. China is accusing often the EU of on the one hand being not ready to multilateralize the territorial disputes in Asia, whereas on the other hand it is urging interested parties in the EU or in Europe to do just that. That's quite interesting, But again, George, thank you very much for this presentation. We don't have much time. We have really only a couple of minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, and it's of course also my fault. My management is not very good. But why don't we? There's one question on the possibly upcoming EU-China summit by the end of this year. What is the question is, the comment is, what is the EU-China summit going to be about? What will the EU and China will have to talk about? What do you think are the priorities, and where would they agree and where would they disagree? Do we know anything about this? Lucrezia, can we start with you? Get your assessment on this, and then move on to John if he wants to, and then I'll also move on to George.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to kick it off with a few thoughts. To my mind, the next EU-China summit is likely going to be in the early months of 2021, and that might replace what was initially proposed as the Leipzig summit, so the 27+1 initiative that is instead going to take place in Brussels. We need to see really, it's difficult to say at this stage what will be discussed. Obviously, the negotiations for the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment are continuing despite the difficulties. We can definitely expect the pandemic to be high on the agenda. And if I may, I'm actually going to link back to something that George was saying in terms of how this is indeed an urgent priority. And luckily, the Biden administration has already indicated that it does plan to rejoin, for example, the WHO and reopen channels for cooperation on epidemic control with Beijing. So absolutely, that's an area where Europeans, Americans, Chinese, and everyone around the world should really cooperate. The EU and China are already collaborating, I think, as part of COVAX. Remains to be seen whether the US will decide to do the same. But regardless, I think that's definitely something that's going to be on the agenda, along with the investment negotiations.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Lucrezia. John, do you want to come in on this, or do you want to answer anything else? Up to you.
Yeah, just very quickly. I think climate change will probably be something else that will be on the agenda. I think that we need to be very careful in terms of how we try to de-link climate change from other issues. you know, when you actually get down to the nitty gritty of how you prepare for dealing with climate change and all of the fundamental changes that you have to make in your economy, in your energy and your energy policy, whatnot, the sorts of technologies that you develop and you roll out, this will have trade implications, this will have economic implications. And so I think that we need to be careful not delinking too much the climate agenda from a broader relationship with China. So just that very quickly, and then very quickly on pandemic as well. I think one thing that particularly if it is on the agenda, I think what we also need to do is start looking at the next pandemic. So looking at learning our lessons from this one and do exactly what many countries in Asia had done after the SARS epidemic, and that's why they've done so much better this time around. I mean, we talked about China's successes, but let's talk about Taiwan, Korea, Japan. They all learned the lessons from the SARS epidemic, and they've done much better. And so I think we need to sit down also with the Chinese, but with the Americans and with many other partners and figure out what exactly we did wrong and what we can do better next time, because this won't be the only one. So we could at least use that as an opportunity to talk with China about that.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, John, on this very positive note. You know, we're not going to invite you again if you already announced the next pandemic. You know, George, do you want to come in on this on anything? Do you want to reply to what I say, or do you want to talk on the summit? Up to you, really. You have the last word.
Yes. Just very briefly and mainly strategically speaking, I don't know up to what extent the European Union had been prepared for the conclusion of the regional agreement, the regional comprehensive economic partnership that was concluded yesterday. But it seems to me that the critical part shaping the European approach will be up to what extent this will accelerate the EU-China agreement or not, and up to what extent the European Union might look for some other opportunities, for example, in further cooperating with India, for instance. So just my contribution to this from a strategic point of view, apart from what my colleague said, because I don't want to repeat the same stuff.
Okay, George, thank you very much for this. Really sorry that we do not have more time to discuss and to include the audience a bit more. It's a bit short, but I think we had a very, very good discussion. Thank you to all of you, to George, Lucrezia, and then John. Please stay on. You know, we have a second session which will be moderated by my friend and colleague Alessia Miglini from my colleague at ISPI. And again, thank you very much. You know, there's no applause here on the internet, of course. It's a shame. Next time we meet in person, and then we have a drink afterwards. But for now, we move on to Alessia. Alessia, over to you. It's all yours.
Thank you, Axel. And thanks everybody for being here. As usual, the China Watcher at ISPI includes 2 different sessions, one more on the political relations, and the second, or I mean, last but not least, on economic relations between this time more EU than all the Western part of the world and China. We have a very, provocative title for the panel. As everybody after the pandemic is figuring out whether the world needs to find a new avenue, new alternative or new approaches to China, both politically and business-wise. We have heard that China has ventured into a different, well, not so different, but as far as communication is concerned, this is a very different approach to more self-sufficiency in technology, energy, and food in the near future. So everybody is wondering whether this will be setting new paths for international relations. Yesterday, the RCEP agreement seems to actually go this direction. If it is true that a very big Asian trade bloc, trading and investment bloc, is about to start in a few years, and although the European Union has very good relations with almost everybody in the Asian bloc. It is to be seen whether the RCEP will accelerate, incentives for Europe to move further, as the last panel has suggested, or instead, if there are two different, parts of the world will be competing with each other as far as integration in trade and investment are concerned. So the panel today hosts three very, very hands-on people on both trade and investment issues. I would like to welcome Marco Chirullo, Deputy Head of Far East Asia Unit at the DG Trade at the European Commission in Brussels. Welcome, Marco, and thank you for being with us today. And then Ms. Wen Song, Executive Director of the China Business Association and Flanders China Chamber of Commerce, also very knowledgeable about EU-China business relations and very hands-on these matters. And last but not least, Mr. Marco Bettin, Chief Operating Officer at the Italy-China Foundation and Vice Chairman of the EU-China Business Association, very knowledgeable about the China society and economy and business. And to all of you, I would like to ask your views of where EU-China relations are going, both in terms of bilateral stricto sensu relations and touching upon the bilateral investment treaty or a comprehensive agreement that might be eventually reached somewhere in the near or far future, and about the trade relations also as a consequence of the RCEP, which everybody's talking about today and in the next few days. So I would leave the floor first to Marco Chirullo. Marco, the floor is yours for about 10 minutes, so we can leave some time for Q&A sessions. If there are, I think there will be.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, ISPI and Fondazione Italia China for the kind invitation. Thank you to the previous speakers for being so enlightening in their interventions. I've heard a lot of things that I could fully share. And if we look at what we can expect in EU-China relations, so answering your question, I think to a large extent this relation has been structured already by the communication, the strategic outlook that was issued last year. And Lucrezia Poggetti very clearly highlighted some of the elements and the actions that we're putting in place. I think that is somehow guiding our relations these days with China when it comes to rebalancing, when it comes to ensuring a more level playing field, and making use of a mix of tools, and tools that are on the one hand aimed at strengthening our internal market, and the international procurement instrument is one example. The FDI screening mechanism that was already mentioned is another example of tools that we've been putting in place. We have with China an intense engagement with a number of dialogues. The summit was mentioned this year. We had a number of very high-level opportunities to engage with China, and economic issues were very high on the agenda, both in the summit in June and the high-level meeting on the 14th of September. Market access issues in the area of financial services, in the area of agriculture, and finally, I would say the negotiating element, which was just mentioned, the comprehensive agreement on investment, is in a way another example, a third pillar of our relation interaction with China. All that remains very relevant in the landscape that is indeed changing. but the main features remain the same along these three main avenues. And we can say that in a way, and talking about the accelerated existing dynamics, that the COVID-19 as a crisis has certainly accelerated such dynamics, and also deteriorated business prospects in China. But above all, they have led to new challenges that have emerged related to the narrative applying to our relations when it comes to supply chain security issues. These have become clear challenges to everyone that need to be addressed. We have seen further restrictions to business citizens, also diplomats, being applied as a result of COVID-19 that we have worked on, and we're exploring ways to tackle that restrictions with Chinese authorities. But of course, the EU keeps reflecting on the long-term challenges, and these are geopolitical. There are challenges that are related also to geopolitical context. It is reflected in the review of the EU of its trade policy, the very concept of strategic autonomy, which was evoked, which is a mix of betting on fair and free trade, but at the same time making sure that we can build strengthened and reliable supply chains, defend our values and interests. These are all elements on which the EU is working hard in the long term to design its long-term strategy when it comes to China. So if we look ahead, the EU implements its joint communication to protect its economy and market, and also create leverage. It is addressing the challenges coming from the domestic trajectories that are emerging in China. We have all just read what came out of the recent plenum that indicated the 14th five-year plan, the implementation of this dual circulation strategy that looks still a bit unclear. Is it a substitution classic strategy, or is it something else? That's something that we'll have to look at and might further create restrictions. So something that we have to further assess and to which we might have to respond accordingly. And then, as it was mentioned, the comprehensive agreement on investment, which is a part of the effort to push for reciprocity and rebalancing in key areas. So in these, when it comes to the comprehensive agreement on investment, it is very clear. We have a commitment to conclude by the end of the year. In order to succeed, that takes a huge effort, and above all, the need for real political commitment on China's side. So knowing that for us, substance will always prevail over timing, over deadlines. But if we want an agreement on the comprehensive agreement on investment, we'll certainly need more to be put on the table by China when it comes to market access, commitments in the telecommunication, ICT sector, new energy vehicles, health and biotech. All these are sectors on which there are clear interest and need for market access opening on the Chinese side. There's a chapter on sustainable development, which is also very important, where there are still major gaps. And again, it's about pushing our values and not only our economic interests. And that's a fundamental element of the agreement, for the agreement to stand politically in front of our decision makers. So there's quite a lot of work in there. I've heard a few words on the RCEP that was mentioned. It is clearly another important factor that will play in the new geopolitical context. It is clear that it puts China more at the heart of the Asian trade and investment network and of agreements and economic relations. It is not. We're still looking at it, and we're talking about an agreement of made of 20 chapters, 17 annexes. 54 schedule. So it will take some time to assess it, but it's clear that it's an agreement that probably is not particularly ambitious in terms of market access commitments, certainly not when it comes to rules, but I wouldn't dismiss it as something just unambitious. It has its value, not least by creating uniform rules on rules of origin, so which could underpin supply chains at regional level. It has its geopolitical value for China because it put it, as I was saying, in the middle of the region economically, and it will probably add to its firepower in terms of economic influence in the region, and not to be dismissed as the first. The real new element is China-Japan. Is the China-Japan preferential conditions, because there wasn't an FTA between China, Japan, and Korea, all the three together. So that adds another important element, and we're still talking about 30% of global trade. And I think what is also important is that India is not in. So basically, that really puts China without the other big power of Center Asia, and that is going to also be a relevant element in the analysis of the importance of our RCEP. So it is possibly it is certainly a very important development, even beyond the real economic value of the commitments. It is something that will induce all trade partners, I think, to reflect on how to further engage into the region. Whether these will induce the EU to accelerate negotiations, for example, on CAI, as it was mentioned, that I don't think so. There are certain elements in there which are very clear. The agreement is worth having if it's worth having, if it's ambitious enough, if it really provides the level of rebalancing that we're looking for on the European side. Otherwise, having let's say a poor shot with China is certainly not worth having. So from that point of view, I think it won't necessarily have an impact on CAI. We have our network of agreements with ASEAN and most actors in the region. We have a long-standing engagement with India, but I won't surprise anyone by saying that this has been a very hard and difficult endeavor. Indian negotiators are certainly not among the easiest, and that's no surprise that they're even our RCEP members had to find out that over the many years of negotiations. But we remain committed also to deepen our relation with India if the conditions were to be there. It's not an easy shot, as I was saying. So these are my comments. I will just add one specific comment that was made by a previous speaker on the fact that it's possible to have stronger ties with China without necessarily having to align to the political drivers that China brings. It is true in many cases, but we also know that economic relevance, economic influence leads to political influence from very often. It's not by chance that Greece in 2017 was the only EU member state that blocked an EU statement on China human rights at the UN. So we have to take that into account. Economic influence comes with a price, and we see it in several occasions, including in the 17+1 process, and that's why we need a strong coordinated response on the EU side, which has to be based on unity and which has to be based on a strategic reflection on how we can build together our response to the challenges that China brings about. I'll stop there, but happy to take questions afterwards.
Okay, thank you, Marco. A lot of food for thought. I have myself many questions, but I won't take time from the other panelists and from the audience, maybe after. So let me give the floor to Ms. Gwen. Gwen, the floor is yours from your point of view, the business side, parallel to the institutional level. What are firms thinking about the new developments in EU-China relations? Is there, the need to set the pace in a very different way from the past, or are you finding your way through in the current situation?
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me here today. And I would first like to give you a better understanding on the role and activities of the EU-China Business Association. So the EUCBA is the Association of Bilateral China Business Associations in Europe, promoting the economic and trade relations between the EU and China. The EUCBA is a unique business platform. It is built up by the bilateral China business associations, such as the Italy-China Foundation, the Flanders-China Chamber of Commerce, the German-China Business Association, and so on. And actually, there is no other association of bilateral associations between the EU and China. Today, we have 19 member associations and represent more than 20,000 European and Chinese companies. We are complementary to the national organizations, and we also thank the Italy-China Foundation for its strong support to the EUCBA. So what do we do? The EUCBA mainly organizes high-level EU-China meetings and conferences between European and Chinese authorities and companies, such as the EU-China Business Summit, which was in the presence of Premier Li Keqiang, and meetings with European commissioners and also with the former Vice President of Investment of the EU. We will also be happy to invite you to our dialogue with the Chinese ambassador to the EU on 10 December, during which you will be able to ask direct questions to the ambassador. An exclusive luncheon also with the European Commissioner for Trade and a group of European companies was also scheduled, but due to the COVID-19, this will turn into an online dialogue, and we will inform you later about the exact timing. In normal non-COVID times, we also coordinate missions to China, and we receive high-level Chinese delegations and introduce them to our member companies, but these are now being organized online. The EUCBA has a very strong network in China and in the EU, and this is also what we want to share with you. In times of today, cooperation between the EU and China can only grow stronger. Both sides need each other more than ever. And in this aspect, it is important that we can have a united European voice and that both sides can have an open and transparent dialogue. As mentioned, Europe exports 400 billion euro worth of products into China each year. Important to mention is that in the first 6 months of this year, China has become the main trading partner of the EU, passing the US. The continued focus on export and investment-led growth makes it important for China to have strong international partnerships. Foreign investments in China have increased in the first 9 months of the year by 5.2%, and also the high-tech sector increased by 25%. This year, e-commerce has become very important, especially in the second, third tier and fourth tier cities. And for the full year of 2019, the value of completed European FDI transactions in China reached $12 billion, which is up more than 70% compared to $7 billion in 2018. The top industries were automotive, agriculture, and food and consumer products and services. For 2020, foreign investment has also increased. Coming back to the question of which sectors do you see as being highly impacted by the new post-pandemic China? First of all, digitalization is clearly one of the leading strategic priorities, and the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated this trend. A recent example is from the Alibaba Group holding, which is pioneering a new manufacturing concept, the Shunxi Digital Factory, where artificial intelligence, robotics, and other advanced technologies are used in the production process. The Alibaba factory in Hangzhou produces tailor-made clothes, and they reduce the time from 6 weeks to 2 weeks. This is an example also how we can learn from the Chinese how they integrate artificial intelligence, robotics, and 5G in their production process. Another example is selling online. China's shopping online extravaganza, China Single Day, which was from 1 to 10 November, set a new record with 300,000 vehicles which were bought online, which is a rise of 160% compared to last year. And the pandemic also sped up the shift from car purchases at stores to online marketing and sales. When offline events were controlled, car makers launched models online, and dealers across the country learned to sell cars via live streaming. Coming back to the other sectors being highly impacted, we can also mention the communication sector, computers, electronic equipment, chemical products, machinery, and of course, healthcare. Technology-rated industries are favored by the Chinese government, and there the demand may grow in particular. Innovative investment is the focus, and this will increase China's emerging role as a technological powerhouse. Also, local R&D of European companies are an opportunity for EU companies to look at. And it enables them not only to grow faster in China, but also globally, as the R&D developed in China can also be used in other countries. European business also feels China compares favorably to other countries as far as government incentives, low R&D costs, and research teams' productivity. Furthermore, a majority of European companies said that Chinese firms were equally or even more innovative than European firms. And they also rather see an opportunity in an increasingly innovative China rather than a threat. And speaking about innovation, China has already become a leader in innovation in several areas, such as the internet industry and artificial intelligence. And Chinese high-tech companies have achieved fast development in spite of the academic. And what they're seeking now is talent for cutting-edge technology. Chinese companies such as Xiaomi and ByteDance, Huawei are busy recruiting talent at home and abroad amid competition with the US. Another area in which you asked me to highlight and being affected by COVID-19 is, of course, healthcare. While China will not encounter a second wave of COVID-19, we might be on our way to a third wave. And as you all know, it is impressive how China tackled the COVID-19 crisis. Healthcare is going online with digital platforms such as online consultation and internet hospitals being endorsed during the pandemic. Shanghai, for example, launched 11 internet hospitals during the pandemic, and China will potentially increase its efforts to localize manufacturing of medical products. MedTech MNCs think that localization of manufacturing will be a key success factor. They also think that local innovation through R&D or partnerships will present new opportunities to serve the needs of the local market. And with this dynamic in mind, companies should consider increasing digital investment and developing strategies for online engagement with stakeholders. MNC's business leaders also predict continued growth in China, and they were also experiencing continued commitment to China. European healthcare companies have a lot to offer in the Chinese market, also in the race for a vaccine to battle COVID-19. Vaccines in China have already been approved for emergency use in China in high-risk groups, such as frontline medical personnel, border staff, people traveling overseas to work, and also in the meanwhile, the EU is developing vaccines. Their sustained international collaboration in the battle against the COVID-19 pandemic is a necessity. And as mentioned before, the EU and China will be having the 33rd round of negotiations on the EU-China Investment Agreement. This will offer an opportunity to increase trade and investment in Europe and in China. The aim is to sign this in 2020, and we do hope that is still the case, taking into account COVID-19. One last point I would like to mention is what are the EU tools for European companies now. Here are a few. For example, Horizon Europe, which is the new Research, Innovation and Science Framework Program that will run between the period 2021 and to 2027. This is an opportunity for European and Chinese companies to cooperate. The EU SME Center is another important tool set up by the European Commission, which supports European SMEs to export and invest in China. And there is also the IPR Help Desk, which offers SME special advice on IPR issues. As you all know, it is important to have IP strategy included in your business dealings with China. From a European perspective, it's very important that there is cooperation and reciprocity. We need to have agreed rules, mutual trust and support for a rules-based international trading system, and reciprocity must also underpin the bilateral relationship. China will represent 30% of global growth over the next 10 years. That is as much as all OECD countries combined. I would like to end that the EU-China Business Association is there for you to help you grow on the Chinese market. Thank you.
Thank you, Gwen. I see you are, very positive compared to the average maybe business these days. We are in lockdown, so maybe the mood is not very high. But I take your point that the reciprocal need to grow together might be a way forward. Condition upon the fact that some aspects that also Marco before mentioned are not down the beaten track of negotiations, or despite the emergency of the pandemic, of course. Thank you again. We'll be back to you after. Now I want to give the floor to the second Marco today, Marco Bettin. Marco, may I ask you to give us the point of view of the Italian business community as far as you can see, in terms of more specifically the Italian view of how relations with China are going on in the near future. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Alessia. Thank you, everybody. And I'm very happy today to be here with you and to this very important event. I've been listening quite careful what the former speaker have said, and right now I just would like to go back to the facts, the latest figure, because nobody have said up to now how is Chinese business going on for the time being. The third quarter, Chinese GDP reached an increase of 4.9%, which is incredible if we compare to the slowdown of the first quarter, which is foreseen minus 6.8% of GDP. This can let us understand that one more time that China is still open for business, and this is actually what everybody in Italy economy also need to focus on. Of course, most of these growing has been supported by investment, mainly in infrastructure and property, but we are still seeing some recovery in some other fields. For instance, and this is the most important, the focus China is bringing on local market. I do believe that China has offset somehow the negative impact on international economy coming from COVID by stressing the importance in developing the local internal market and local consumption. And this is actually one of the strategy Beijing is going to implement in order to support the Chinese economic growth. Among this, I do believe that it is especially very important also for the Italian companies. I would highlight a couple of words as a key words: quality, innovation, and sustainability. When we talk about quality, it is because quality is in line with Beijing strategy and target to let the citizen, the Chinese citizen, level of life higher, and this is actually what it made in order to let become Chinese a more prosperous community. And this is actually what I believe a kind of important opportunity also for European companies and Italian companies. As a matter of fact, the possibility and the willing for Chinese citizens, the 400 million middle-class citizens, to achieve a higher level of life, higher standard of life, will bring them also to look for products from abroad, product and service for abroad. And this is actually an important tool also for the Italian companies and European companies to enter the Chinese market. Of course, quality also means innovation, and the program Made in China 2025 will let us understand that China is doing seriously about the possibility to reach independency on technological level from abroad. And in a few years, I do believe that this can be almost achieved. How they can do it? Investing in R&D, research and development, through also international cooperation, and of course through acquisition abroad. And this is actually another key point of international expansion, Chinese expansion to international market. The possibility, actually, the biggest difference between before and now is that import of products and service, as well as sustainability, so are the two key words, but they are not only words. The Chinese government is supporting these activities, is providing tools in order to ease this kind of process, which is a kind of revolution in its attitude. We have been always seeing, and even now, in any case, China as a quite conservative nation in which they try to push local products and local services. But right now they are on this concern more open to cooperate from abroad, and at least to import some knowledge and some products which will help them to prepare a new society. Of course, the possibility to import technology and will also pose a kind of threat to international community, because as a matter of fact, the Chinese local production is getting high, and the quality and the innovation of Chinese production is becoming more and more competitive towards international pairs. And of course, this might be very in mind to everybody want to access Chinese market, but this also should push international companies also to invest more in R&D and innovation in order to be competitive in Chinese markets. What I was saying before, sustainability, this is also another keyword on the new course of China, which I believe is quite interesting. In September, Xi Jinping also participated in the UN meeting, and he stated on September 22 that in 2030, CO2 emissions will reach a peak, and in 2060, China should achieve carbon neutrality. So before 2060. Of course, this is actually a very ambitious target for China, but not only for China, especially when we think about China, which, as a matter of fact, is the biggest polluter in the world right now. Okay, and then this is very ambitious. But building a more sustainable world is actually a forced choice for China for 4 points. First, need of social sustainability, focusing on people and citizen health. And of course, this sentiment is pushed also by the coronavirus strategy. Second, economy sustainability. Severe damage from atmospheric phenomena like typhoon or sea level pose a higher cost on, for instance, sanitary system, which China needs to cope with. Third, geopolitical targets. More independence from other countries about the energy resources. It is also very important. Now imports 72% of its oil and use 43% of the gas from abroad. So the dependence from abroad is very important. So reaching a kind of a more independent energy source is very important also for its sustainability. Fourth, increase of its soft power. and its weight and influence at the global level. These 4 points is very important whenever we think at the middle long-term strategy of China. But if you go back to the middle term and the short result of pandemic and the possibility, we go back again, for instance, to one of the sector Italy actually is leading throughout the world, which is luxury. If you look at the luxury, China counts on 32% of global purchase in this sector. And more than 70% of this purchase has been made throughout Chinese citizen travel abroad. Of course, the pandemic stopped, as we said before, stopped its travel throughout the world. And this could cause a changing also in the strategy of the international players in this sector. Now China goes back to almost pre-COVID level of market about the luxury, and it reached 80–90% of 2019. So this is quite important. But now the international companies like the made in Italy luxury maisons and so on, they need also to look at a market like a local market. So as we said before, now China is reducing its travel abroad. So Italian companies as well as European companies to focus on the local market, and they need to structure a more direct presence in the country. This would guarantee them better visibility, better market, but also they would also control a next, most probably a fierce competition with local players, which are actually increase their quality standards. Digital systems also is a key to develop Chinese market. Before I had also when talking about digital and during the latest single day extravaganza from 1 to 11 November, Alibaba actually declared that they reach more than 25 billion US in merchandise volume, and in 2 windows they opened. So this let us understand what is the level now of international business relationship through digital and e-commerce, which is actually after the pandemic has been even stronger. And this is also another key point. Now China is not only using tools like e-commerce and digital system, but it's a model. It's becoming a model for the world. And this is something we have to understand. Size matter, and China has 1.4 billion citizens. So whenever they implement a new system or a new way to promote a kind of activities, they can test it in the Chinese market, which is very important. And most probably, China is becoming the first country which will own its own digital sovereign digital currency, which is another point also we have to copy. Probably not immediately, but in the middle long term, of course. China has issued actually a digital currency electronic payment system, which has been tried, and the People's Bank of China has drawn up the first draft law in order to implement this new system, which is quite interesting because China will soon have its own sovereign digital currency, and this may contribute to become China really the first country that we heard in the past cashless economy system. Maybe not so far. China will become the first cashless economy system. And this is quite interesting because China, as I said before, it is testing this kind of system. And I would like to bring an example on this. I was saying that this new system has been tested in 4 cities, Suzhou, Shenzhen, Chengdu, and Xiangyang, and as well as the location of the next Winter Olympic Games. And moreover, it has been used in the next Winter Olympic cities. Beside of that, it has been also tested in one of the most successful companies that we all know. Everybody go to China know these companies. Didi is that platform which provide taxis and logistic and transportation and delivery system. And it is quite interesting because this new digital currency and this test, and Didi claimed to have more than 500 million customers. So this means that this new digital currency probably will start soon to stay in the pocket of potentially 500 million customers, which not only will use it to pay the taxes or transportation systems, but also they will use it also to purchase food, for instance, or goods, because Didi is also engaged in these kind of services. And this, I believe, should let us understand what China is becoming now. So China is not only a competitor, is first of all a market. Second is a kind of model people need to look at in order to understand how to move it, and if they want to enjoy that big market. And they need, of course, to comply with the new technology, the new system that China is also implementing. Of course, we should to have a kind of a level play field, as before we say. In order to access the Chinese market, we need to follow the rules, as well as Chinese companies need to follow the rules abroad. But I do believe that in some way, this period has led China to change a little bit its attitude, and to become a kind of model and a leader throughout international countries in order to stimulate cooperation. And we, as Italian companies and European companies, need to take the chance to deal with China with another attitude, and also to look at to deal with Chinese companies not only in China, physically speaking, but also throughout the world. And the just sentence I would like to say, dealing with China is also meaning to deal with thousands of companies throughout the world, Chinese companies throughout the world. If you look at in Italy we have 760 Italian companies, which has been invested by more than 400 Chinese groups. So dealing with them also will allow Italian companies to have a key in order to enter Chinese market. And I think nobody has ever said about this. And I think this is a kind of new keys in order to access Chinese market.
Okay, thank you, Marco, for your broad overview of the current development that may actually build more of a market for others except for Chinese firms. But if something can be understood, I think, but please, react to this, summary that I'm making now, is that maybe after decades of European efforts to engage with China on better trade terms, better market access terms, better investment guidelines terms, and whatsoever, shall we not run the risk of being kicked out of the Chinese market if not, accepting the digital currency and the old digital platform systems? I mean, to what extent does Europe have a strategic autonomy aim that actually builds upon what Europe has as a technology objective for itself, not following, Chinese rules or standards or, new development strategies for their own domestic market? I mean, I'm not trying to, reduce the potential of engaging with China, but to what extent the engagement is moving on somewhere and not, I mean, risking of being locked in the Chinese system together with their standard setting objectives. I mean, the floor's to you. I mean, three of you together. Maybe we start from the first Marco and then to Gwen. Just very briefly, we are running out of time, but we can take some more minutes because I think this is very crucial. Marco Chirulo, your view about this? Please?
Yes, thank you, Alessia, and I think you're taking an angle which is very, very relevant. It is clear, and nobody contests the fact that China is a market full of opportunities, and our business has luckily taken many of those. And it is, I've highlighted China as a negotiating partner, as a strategic competitor, but it is also a partner with whom we cooperate. Research was mentioned, climate change is another example. But let's look at the trend, and you mentioned the possibility of having the Chinese market progressively less open to European operators if and when they do not comply with the standards set by the Chinese. And if we look at the cybersecurity law, which has been adopted, and we're still looking for the implementing regulations that have not been issued. If we look at that, it's already quite of a concern. Issues such as the social credit system cast a shadow, a doubt as to the ability of our business to be able to operate freely in China. It is certain. It is a fact that companies are more and more are dealing with a close scrutiny of the party on the action of big companies. It is just a fact, and technologically, as you said, as we have all said, China is becoming a big giant and a big power with its own standard setting objectives. So when we refer to the strategic autonomy on the EU side, it will have to have different components. One I mentioned already is strengthening our internal market, because as much as we have an interest in the Chinese market, China has proved over the last few years through mergers and acquisitions and takeovers has proven its interest in strategic areas. So we have to be careful. And through building our own technological independence and strength. It's part of what we are doing in terms of action in the 5G sector. Data. It is certainly a fundamental pillar of the European response and of its strategic autonomy that we are aiming at. So yes, in a nutshell, nobody wants to belittle belittling the importance of China as a market of the present and a market of the future. But it cannot happen at the terms and the standards and the values set by China. That's why negotiations and let's say autonomous tools on the EU side have to work in order to prevent that to happen, because the trend is very clearly there.
Thank you very much. Gwen, can we have your view on this?
Yes. Yes, sure. So as said before, China needs foreign technology, and for European companies, China also remains a top location for investment. So it's very important that we continue to invest in R&D. And I think what is especially important is the speed of innovation, because as said before, China is innovating very fast, and this is seen in the way they have tackled the COVID-19 crisis. And this also keeps us innovative, because you need to follow the speed of the innovation of China. And if you don't, then you will indeed be out of it. So it keeps companies awake, but it is a market that cannot be missed for European companies. And also, as said before, Chinese companies are investing also in the EU abroad, although investment has gone down compared to the big years that they have done a lot of overseas investment.
Okay, Marco, do you have something more on
this?
Yes,
just a couple of words. I do believe actually what Marco Chirulla said before. I was looking at the opportunity mainly on the economic point of view, but of course need a level play field, as I said before. So confrontation is very important. It is not only that Europe need to complain with the Chinese system. Of course, you need to discuss. The problem is that as long as we still keeping discussing, China with other 14 nations has signed a regional comprehensive economic partnership. So now Europe is discussing how to deal with, and China is for sure leading this coalition of companies in order probably to comply with this new system. So Europe probably would not only need to comply and to deal with Chinese market, but with a wider one. So what I mean that at the time being, we need to be faster, as Gwen said before, and we need also to see the opportunity, not only the threat.
Thank you, Marco. I'm not sure whether there are questions from the audience or from the other speakers, the previous speakers, maybe. I'm asking a little help from the admin staff. No, there are no questions from outside. I would play the role of the provocative, speaker. So still I see that a kind of a self-sufficiency aim by China actually pushes Europe towards this strategic autonomy, which is another, way to say a similar thing. Maybe not as much as China is pursuing, but for sure, in terms of medium, long-term scenarios, still I'm missing which can be the avenues for real cooperation. The real complementarities that Europe and China have together. Starting from the fact that we are not, in a position as the US and China, which is very, very confrontational, no matter what Biden will do. But Europe has, in spirit and in fact, very different positions vis-a-vis China. But on the other side, China is a little bit, been a bit pushy in terms of, getting their own pace in Asia. Starting from European relations with major Asian countries and also in ASEP, Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, very ambitious agreements were signed. They are very successful. How do you see Europe through this, FTAs and agreements, finding a way to build long-standing partnerships with all of Asia, China included? Please, whoever wants to take this up.
I can give it a try, in the sense that your question is a $1 million question. The truth is that we have a very, very good and established strategy in Asia as a whole. Having negotiated the agreement with Japan, I have a fairly good overview of the type of agreements based on international standards on fair and free trade that we have with Japan, with Korea, with Singapore, and you name it. So we have an avenue in the region. And I mentioned international standards because, as a matter of fact, we remain fundamentally focused an entity fundamentally focused on multilateralism, cooperation, sharing of principles and standards, and based on which operating investment and trade in investment and trade area. So we have a strategy in Asia. We have a network of agreement that speak to each other, that they coexist very fruitfully and effectively. And there's China, and China is the big elephant in there. And there's not one answer. We have a number of avenues with China, and they basically go down to one fundamental request to China, that it is to play a role that is commensurate to its growing importance, being it in Geneva in the WTO, where China is supposedly a big supporter, but in fact it has not engaged yet to significantly reform its the WTO rule book, or in bilateral relations, or even engagement in third markets, because we all know that the Belt and Road initiative is an ambitious initiative. Fine, as long as it becomes something sustainable from an economic point of view, environmental point of view, that's something we can cooperate with. If it becomes a way of imposing its own standards and creating debt trap for third countries, it becomes much more difficult to cooperate. So where are we going with China? The whole of our engagement, being in negotiations, so being through the dialogues, the summit aims at triggering that sense of responsibility on the side of China. We have, as you say, the willingness to work together and we don't have the same standpoint as the US, but we do agree with the US with when it comes to the challenges. We might not agree, at least until now, with the responses, but we agree on the challenges. And I have the feeling that that the narrative that has been developing on over the last 2 years just urge China to come up with the response that is acceptable when it comes to setting standards, to playing by the rule, but to accepting level playing field for a country that, despite self-declaring itself developing country, is a major actor. And that's where we want to operate and play with China. If that is not happening, then we go back to your question. A fundamental reflection will take place, because that's what we're being asked to look at. If we can work together with China, very good. If we cannot on terms that are acceptable, we need at least to ensure that our business and our company at home are operating in a fair and safe environment against unfair practices. So I don't unfortunately have an answer in case China doesn't deliver. We know we have a lot of tools, from Kai to other tools I've described before. They all go in the same direction, but we need China to play ball. And one of the things let's see in the future with the change of administration on the US side is, of course, what something we will certainly hope for, is to be able to work, to go back to cooperating with our like-minded countries, and in particular the United States on that front, to design together an effective way of engaging constructively with China.
About myself, if I can, I agree with what Marco said. I do believe that it is very important to find a common way, a middle way between the needs of institutional relationship at the same level, so level play field, the rules, international regulation, with the needs of the market. This is the key, okay? Because before I was saying, for instance, that during the 11/11 big sales in internet, $75 billion in trading volume, the first country exporting to China was USA. Okay, so if you look at exactly what we are saying, so in one way there is a fight between the two countries in order to try to overcome each other, and then on the other way the market follow the possibilities, which is actually lead to companies to sell to China. This is actually, of course, in middle long term, Alessia, I agree with you. we have to be very careful to negotiate with China, to look at exactly how can we develop a sustainable relationship. But first of all, we need Europe to be together and to look at the interests of companies and of the countries, and to try to find the middle way on this in order to let both these aspects on the same level.
Thanks, Marco. Gwen, you have some more points on this, or? Gwen, yeah? Last word?
Just what I said, it's very short because it's very difficult to add anything more after very good presentations that already have been given. What I said is that both sides need each other and that it's important to have an open and transparent dialogue so that this will certainly create good results. I think I have nothing else more to add.
Okay, so we are very late. So I would like to thank all the panelists, all the audience, the staff and Fondazione Italia-Cina and ISPI for organizing this. Well, the bottom line, I think, is only one. Times they are changing and we will follow them through. If dialogue is useful, we have hopefully contributed to this with very, very informed speakers, hands-on the processes, relations, dialogues, and negotiations. So thanks a lot. And I hope to see you soon again in one of our next China Watchers.
Thanks again to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the invitation.